Hello my friend, and welcome to this painting tutorial. Here I'll show you how I painted the next type of miniatures that come with the core box of Horizon Zero Dawn, the board game. In my last video I painted the little watchers. This time we'll focus on the horse-like striders. The amount of details on these miniatures is quite surprising, considering that the figures are cast out of some kind of board game plastic. Also, the mold lines aren't very noticeable, so that this time I didn't bother to remove them at all. I prepared the models for painting in mounting them to old paint pots using blue tack and priming them with a grey spray primer. Let's prepare our wet palette. I very much prefer to use a wet palette since it keeps all paints fresh and usable for hours, so that I can always come back to the colors I used some time ago on this miniature. Especially with such detailed models where we'll need the same colors multiple times during the painting process, this is really handy. First, I'm mixing a paint out of a very dark grey, a dark brownish grey, and a dark greenish grey in equal quantities. With this mixture, I'm going to paint most of the miniature because the most part of the strider surface is dark. I try to leave the spots that will be painted with lighter colors untouched, but I don't bother to avoid them too accurately. This would just cost too much time and really isn't necessary. On this sketch you can see which parts of the miniature I covered with the dark mixture. Since I used the paint well diluted with water, you can see that the raised parts aren't as dark as the recessed ones, creating some nice contrast with ease. Next I'm going to use some light grey paint with just a hint of brown in it to paint the lighter parts of the model. This time I try to paint as accurate and tidy as possible. In this sketch you can see which parts get painted with this light color. After the paint is dry, I'll give those lighter parts some color variation. For that purpose I'm going to use a green color, a bluish green, and a yellowish brown one. Of course, also well diluted with water, so that all the details will remain sharp and recognizable. On this sketch you can see my distribution of those paints. It somewhat resembles the colors of the striders in the video game. Here I'm painting the little green area, here the bluish green ones, and here I'm working on the brown parts. The surface of the striders not only consists out of metal pieces. There are also quite some areas that seem to be covered with some kind of tarpaulin. Here I'm mixing the bluish-green paint with the dark grey. With this mixture I paint the tarpaulin under the belly, on the legs, and so on. You can see those regions here on the sketch. Some little spots on the figure will now be painted with this vibrant orange. Again, you can see in the sketch which parts get painted with this color. Now I'll give this blaze canister its distinct color. For that I need a dark brownish green and a bright yellow color, alongside the dark and the light grey base colors and the orange. First, I'm painting the small recessed areas on the bottom of the canister with the dark green. Then I correct any mistakes with the light grey. The raised part on the top side gets painted with the dark color. The lid and a small stripe on each of the sides receive the yellow paint. Finally, a little spot on the dark part and the center of the lid get colored with the vibrant orange. Now it's time to give the whole miniature a wash to enhance the contrast. For that purpose I'm using a dark wash, quite generously diluted with some airbrush thinner. With this mixture I'm covering the whole miniature. Just splash it on, but always take care that the mixture doesn't pool on some areas too much. If it does, just use your brush to soak up the mess on these spots. The wash takes quite some time to dry completely. When it's dry, the contrast on the different parts of the model is greatly enhanced. But also all the colors are darkened now, so that I'm going to make them lighter again. I'm using the light grey base color to lighten up the greyish parts. With the greenish, bluish and brownish parts, I'm firstly using their respective base colors, followed with even lighter mixes that I'm creating out of those base colors and the light grey one. Here I'm lightening up grey parts. Here the brownish ones. Here the tarpaulin parts, and so on. Finally, the orange gets back its vibrancy. For that, I'm using the plain orange color once more. Now I'm going to give the flat metal pieces that are painted with the dark color at the moment some color variation as well. For that purpose I'm mixing the dark brownish green with the dark grey color. There are just a few flat metal parts to be painted with this mixture, and it's just a subtle color shift, but it enriches the appearance. Using an ordinary pencil, I'm now creating some metal chips on the hard edges of the dark metal parts. For the lighter parts, I'm switching to a weathering pencil. I'm going to use dark aluminium here. Just slight strokes on the edges. Now let's concentrate our attention on the hoses or pipes on the miniature. According to the video game example, they have two different colors. The ones on the upper head and behind the blade bones are some kind of dark rubber grey, while the ones leading from the blazer canister towards the head and beneath the belly are of fluorescent yellow-green color. Let's start with the dark ones. To paint them, I'm mixing some of the dark green I just used to paint the dark flat metal plates into the bluish color of the tarpaulins. The greenish hoses will be base coated using a dark olive green. When this is dry, I'm going to paint most of the upward facing parts of the hoses with a brighter green, and finally even smaller regions of that with a really vibrant yellow-green. When all of this will be dry, I'll give all the green hoses a final coat using a yellow fluor paint. Here I'm painting the olive green hoses with the brighter green. Followed by the striking yellow-green. And finally, the yellow fluor paint is applied. While this is drying, I start modeling the base. For that purpose, I'm going to use a texture paint containing very tiny grains of sand. Since the base is so large, I decided to also glue some little stones onto it, to make it a bit more interesting. Super glue is just fine to hold them in place. Finally, the whole surface of the base, with exception of the stones, is covered with the texture paint. This has to dry now for a while. In the meantime, we can complete the painting of the miniature with the last few steps. I'd like to enhance the brightness of the light metal parts a little bit more. Also, the glazed canister's yellow will receive some small highlights. So, I mix some plain white into the light grey and into the yellow paint. With those lighter versions, I slightly enhance the contrast of the grey metal parts and the canister. Also, I paint two small bright white dots into the lenses of the eyes. The texture paint on the base is still not completely dry, but that's no issue. We nevertheless can bring some contrast to it by painting the whole thing with a dark muddy wash. Here I'm using blue fluor paint to color the eyes. When the base is nearly dry, I'm using pigments to make its surface look more like actual soil. Out of some different of those powdery paints, I mixed a rich brown one, which I apply to the base with an old brush. This has to dry now. I'm using the time to paint very small white dots into the very center of each of the two lenses. Using a yellowish brown, I'm painting the rim of the base. I let this coat dry and give it a second one to achieve an even look without patches. To give the base an even more natural look, I'm going to use grass tufts of different kinds. And also some with little red flowers on it. These materials are available in an astonishing range of variations, so that you'll certainly find some that you like. They can easily be manipulated using some tweezers and glued onto the base using Mod Podge or some other regular PVA glue. Here I'm applying the second coat of color to the rim. And when everything have had enough time to dry completely, the model can be sealed up using some matte varnish. And that's the final result. I hope you like it. And if you liked the video, please come around and check for the next ones. For now, I'd like to wish you a good day.